Nice to see everybody. Senator Martin, Representative Hennessy, State Librarian Wigan, General Scorzato, General McHale, and I think we have somebody else here who's a general officer. If I've forgotten, forgive me. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Before we get into the regular part of the program, I wonder if we could give a big hand for Krista Jardins and the 102nd Band for this great music. It's great that we have the 102nd, we're honoring the 102nd, and we have their band here to entertain us as well, which is really terrific. I'm George Ripley, Chairman of the Connecticut Militia Heritage Committee, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's program. In addition to being the Heritage Committee's annual military history program, we actually have a dual program today. It's also the Connecticut State Library's Third Thursday program for November. If you have not attended one of the State Library's Third Thursday programs, I would highly recommend it. They're excellent. The schedule is on the website, once a month at noontime, great programs. In recent years, we have commemorated a number of important milestones in Connecticut's military history, including the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, the 100th anniversary of World War I, or the World War, deference to one of our people who's here today with us, and the 100th anniversary of the Mexican border campaign. Today, we honor one of Connecticut's most famous military units of citizen soldiers on its 100th anniversary. That's the 102nd Infantry Regiment. And how about a round of applause for the 102nd? And we've got soldiers from 102nd. I mean, it's really quite remarkable that we have a unit in Connecticut whose lineage stretches back to the very earliest days of our colony, 1639, according to the material that I read describing the 102nd, and right up to the present, continuous existence. I mean, that's really phenomenal. The 102nd was created when the historic 1st and 2nd Connecticut Infantry Regiments were combined in August 1917 while at Camp Yale preparing for deployment to France. The 102nd and its predecessor units have served our state and nation continuously with excellence and valor from the earliest days of Connecticut's history through the current global war on terrorism. What a remarkable record of service. Today we will learn about two of its significant engagements. Before we hear from our first speaker, I would like to take the opportunity to thank the sponsors of today's event, or today's program. The Connecticut State Library and its Museum of Connecticut History. Curator Dave Corrigan's over here. State Librarian Ken Wigan is up here. The General Assembly's Veterans Affairs Committee, and the Connecticut Military Department. Okay, you're going to get tired of all these requests for applause, but how about a round of applause for these organizations and the great work they do for all of us. Senator Henry Martin is a longtime resident of Bristol and who served in various positions in Bristol's city government and is now in his second term as a state senator. Fresh from the budget wars, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Assistant Senate Republican Majority Leader and a co-chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee from the 31st Senatorial District, Senator Henry Martin.
Hi. So it looks like you have a pretty packed program this afternoon, so I'll tell you what Elizabeth Taylor said to her fifth husband. I won't keep you long. Okay, so listen, I'm very honored to be here, first of all, and I kind of figured, I didn't know quite what to say, because I kind of thought that you would be getting a little bit of history lesson here today, so just bear with me just a little bit. I'm truly honored to be here. The 102nd has its deep roots in Connecticut that go back to the early colony days, and I just finished watching John Adams on the HBO series. It's something to watch, how the early developments of our country formed. So if you have an opportunity to take a look at that series, it's quite good. So we're truly fortunate to have brave soldiers of the 102nd defending our freedoms. We're, in my role as the co-chair of the Veterans Committee, I try to ensure that the needs of the soldiers are met when they leave the military life, when they no longer have that uniform to wear. I believe it's important that we as a state and as a nation, that we take care of you veterans who have fought and sacrificed your lives, regardless if it's for a 2-year, 3-year, or a lifetime of service to our country. Some of the ways that we do this here in Connecticut are the services that we provide you as when you enter the civilian life. And examples of that are property tax exemptions for veterans, the educational assistance and tuition waivers, financial aid from the Soldiers, Sailors, and Marines Fund, and also from the Commissioner of Veterans Affairs, motor vehicle registration and license fee exemptions. All of these started as a bill, proposed bill, usually in the Veterans Affairs Committee. And as co-chair, along with Senator Jack Hennessy, we select these bills that will move forward on your behalf. There are 4,000 different bills that get proposed, and maybe every year, and maybe we see about 200 in the veterans, and it's Jack and myself and a handful of other legislators that reduce these down, that eventually maybe 3 or 4 become statute to benefit you. I want you to all know that Jack's door and my door are always open for your ideas, because that's where they start from. Your ideas, actually, how can we help you while you're in your community. So this past season, one particular bill that myself and a few other legislators supported or tried to move forward was the Honor Guard, the full funding of the Honor Guard, that and make it a permanent statute. And we weren't successful, but we were. It did not become permanent. It did get out of committee. But in the end, when this tough budget battle that we did, everybody was on the same page that we were going to fund $500,000 for the Honor Guard. So you have it's safe for the next 2 years. So I'm happy to say that for you. It's just a small gesture I think that we can do for you, and to show you the opportunity and honor and the respect that you all deserve. I just want to finish with this. I think there's a lot of things going on in our world right now. I think that another thing that our veterans do, and I wish that our country would do more of, is we pray. 2017 has been a particularly difficult year of senseless violence and turmoil throughout our whole country and throughout the world. We've seen the saber rattling of rogue countries that threaten us. We have seen the rising toll of fragile lives lost to drugs and drug abuse. We've seen the senseless slaughter of those celebrating music, and those, including the smallest of children, who went to God's house to worship, only to be monstrously cut down. It can be pretty numbing. It can be pretty discouraging, and it can make you almost wonder, what can we possibly do to make positive changes in our world? How can we possibly make these positive changes in people's lives? It can make us want to give up, really trying. It's almost cynical type of thinking. I want to tell you a little bit about a movie that I saw that inspired me and gave me hope. And it's called The War Room. Maybe some of you have seen it. And The War Room is about what we can do to help the world. The movie's main character is Miss Clara. And Miss Clara's husband served as a captain in the service. He was part of the strategy team. At the beginning of the movie, Miss Clara talks about her personal and spiritual strategy. War, she says, has been part of humanity in every age. There always seems to be something to fight for. Someone has to develop a strategy to combat the enemy. Miss Clara says, very few of us know how to fight the right fight, or fight the right way. Victory doesn't come by accident. This was Miss Clara's strategy to fight the right way. And she created a war room in her closet. A quiet place for her to pray for her husband while he was at war. The movie emphasizes Miss Clara's prayer strategy and the power of prayer. It encourages us to pray every day and for those who need our prayers. It encourages us to be prayer warriors. And through those prayers, we can lift each other up and overcome anything. And why do I bring this up today? Because I look at the men and the women in this room, and I see warriors. You've been warriors for freedom and warriors for liberty. You've been warriors in defending each of us so that we can live our lives and raise our families in the greatest country in the world. There's a memorable line in that movie. Miss Clara, the main character, says, pray and ask God to do what He can do. And only He can do it. And then get out of the way so that He can do it. She makes the point through prayer, that through prayer, when we humble ourselves, we can raise up a generation that will take light into the world. Prayer can bring clarity, prayer can bring solutions, and prayer can bring positive outcomes. Miss Clara talks about how within each of us there is a prayer warrior which needs to be awakened. All of you all have been warriors. You have made huge sacrifices. Now I ask you to consider being prayer warriors. Pray for our families. Pray for our young people. Pray for their futures. Pray for our towns and our cities. Pray for our state. Pray for our country. Pray for freedom. Pray for liberty. Your prayers are needed. And your prayers will be heard. The War Room movie ends with an emphasis on a quote from Scripture. It's from 2 Chronicles, chapter 7, verse 14. Here it is. If my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I'll forgive their sin and heal their land. I find great meaning in these words. I ask you to join me to humble ourselves as a people, to be humble people that will pray every day so that God can heal our land. If so, if we all do it, imagine the healing power or the healing that will take place. Imagine the good that will evolve. God bless you. God bless all you veterans here today, particularly those in the 101st or 102nd Infantry. God bless America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. That's very heartfelt remarks. Representative Jack Hennessy is a Boston College graduate and served as a sergeant in the Army in the 1st Battalion Ranger 75th Infantry. He was first elected to the General Assembly in 2004 and was a key sponsor of the landmark Environmental Justice Bill. He is a co-chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee and proudly represents the 127th District in the North End of Bridgeport. I am privileged to present Representative Jack Hennessy to say a few words.
Good afternoon and greetings to the soldiers, retirees, friends, and family. As the House Chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee, I am deeply honored to be given the opportunity to address you today on the 100th anniversary of the 102nd Infantry Regiment. History is important, especially to our nation's warriors, to ensure we keep alive the flame of gratitude and respect for the forgotten infantrymen. If we don't, who will? In today's busy world, it's easy to forget the price of freedom, a freedom many take for granted. But not today, not here in Connecticut State Capitol building. I am so humbled to be able to participate in honoring an organization with such a storied history. The pride on the faces of the soldiers that are before us, that have served in this regiment, tells us all what we truly need to know. When I entered the ranks of the 1st Ranger Battalion, 75th Infantry, I got to experience infantry firsthand. It's a brotherhood. It's those who actually have the boots on the ground. It's the infantry that takes ground and wins wars. It's on the shoulders of the blood and the guts of the grunt that this country's freedom stands upon. I was a radio operator in the Rangers, and it was a good job, but I was not happy until I bugged my officers to get me to acquire secondary MOS as 11B infantryman. And then I went on to earn the expert infantry badge. The years have passed. I'm glad I can still serve my country as an elected official, but my heart and soul will always be with the men and women who serve our country in the combat arms. Stand forth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Representative Hennessy. Ken Wigan is a graduate of Simmons Graduate School of Library and Information Service and has served as the Connecticut State Librarian since October 1998. Prior to that, Ken worked in academic and public libraries in New Hampshire, where he also served as state librarian for 8 years. Ken, as the Chief Administrative Officer of the Connecticut State Library, Ken directs the development and administration of the library programs and services, including the Office of Public Records Administrator, the State Archives, the Museum of Connecticut History, and the Library for the Blind and Physically Disabled. It is my honor and privilege to introduce to you Kendall F. Wigan, the Connecticut State Librarian.
Thank you, George. I'm very honored to be here today representing the State Library. I'd also like to take a moment to thank all of those involved in organizing today's event. The State Library includes the State Archives, which is the keeper of the state's documentary history, and the Museum of Connecticut History, whose collections include many artifacts relating to Connecticut's military history. And although the State Library, altogether, the State Library is a very rich resource for anyone studying Connecticut's role in the Great War, including the history of the 102. World War I greatly impacted Connecticut. Around 67,000 Connecticut men and women served in the armed forces during World War I, many of whom were in the 102nd Regiment. On the home front, men and women came to Connecticut to work in the rapidly expanding factories that had begun supplying the Allies before our entry into the war, and then for our own forces once the U.S. entered the war. But how did the Connecticut State Library end up with so much documentation about World War I? First, War Governor Marcus H. Holcomb had the foresight in February of 1917 to conduct a statewide manpower census to assess the available manpower for what he knew was the coming involvement of the United States into the war. Connecticut was the only state to do such a census, and the efficiency with which it was completed was likely the model for the first elective service registration conducted on June 5th, 1917. And that manpower census is available in the archives. Then as the troops returned from France, George Goddard, the state librarian at the time, created and sent out questionnaires to each returning service member. Connecticut was one of only 4 states to do this, and ours was the most compelling, as it asked service members to reflect upon their service, their wartime service. And these questionnaires are also available through the state archives. Additionally, throughout the war, Goddard and Major General George M. Cole, Adjutant General of the Connecticut National Guard, set about to preserve as many records as possible for, in Goddard's words, to the benefit of our children and their children. This resulted in the creation of the Department of War Records of the Connecticut State Library in 1919, and one of the largest collections of World War I material in the country. This collection includes the records of the 26th Division, which Goddard took on loan from General Edwards in order to make copies of them. It also includes the Captain Daniel Strickland papers, which are currently being processed and will have a finding aid available soon. These are the papers which Strickland used in the story of the 102nd Regiment. Today, we are continuing to add to the collection. During the centennial period, the State Library has focused on collecting soldiers' stories. Christine Pitsley, who you will hear from shortly, has led the Remembering World War I project, a collaborative statewide project focused on creating a community-generated archive of World War I stories. The Connecticut State Library, in partnership with libraries, museums, and community organizations around our state, have been holding Digitization Day events to record and digitize the World War I collections of Connecticut citizens. The museum has also increased its collecting efforts, adding to its collection of World War I artifacts. Together, all of these efforts, past and present, help tell the story of the unique and amazing role Connecticut played in the war, both on the home front and on the battlefield. I'm now going to introduce the film that we're about to see. We're going to be seeing Never Forgotten. This original documentary by the American Battle Monuments Commission follows the story of Sergeant Paul Maynard, a doughboy from Connecticut. And among the first to volunteer for the Army, Paul survived some of the most brutal fighting American forces endured, including the Battle of Beaulieu Wood and St. Michel campaign. Paul's grandniece, Lisa Ann Maynard, and the ABMC Superintendent Dave Bedford tell Paul's story in an effort to ensure that his legacy and the legacies of all Americans who fought during the Great War are never forgotten. Paul's great-nephew, Rich Maynard, is a resident of Guilford, and he has spoken at a number of times about his great-uncle and the collection of letters that he has, some of which are featured in a project the State Library did with Chris Radio to make archival material accessible to the blind. Without further ado, Never Forgotten.
No life should just be forgotten, especially during what was thought to be the war to end all wars. Understand that these just aren't names, that these were human beings. These were family members. These were people that worked in the general store. Everybody put a lot on the line. And I'm really hoping that Paul will be the catalyst for people to say, let's look more into our history in this. I think Paul was very proud to wear the American uniform and even prouder to serve his country. And they call World War II our greatest generation, and they are our greatest generation. But before them, there was another great generation. There were a heck of a lot of young men in this country who knew really nothing going on in the world. Their world was their little community they lived in, and just gave up everything they had in their lives to put on a uniform and go help countries that they had never imagined visiting, much less going to and fighting and dying for people that were just like them, just spoke a different language.
Dear brother, we little know what is before us in this world, and probably is best we don't. We are all trusting in God, hoping that everything will come out all right, if it be His will. Remaining your loving brother, Private Paul Maynard, Company M, 102nd Infantry.
Three 3,000 miles from home, an American army is fighting for you. Everything you hold worthwhile is at stake. Only the hardest blows can win against the enemy we are fighting. Invoking the spirit of our forefathers, the Army asks your unflinching support to the end that the high ideals for which America stands may endure upon the earth.
Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the run, on the run. Hear them calling you and me, every son of liberty. Hurry right away, no delay, no delay. Make your daddy glad to have had such a lad. Tell your sweetheart not to mind to be proud her voice in mine. Over there, over there. Send the word over there. That the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming. The drum coming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer. Send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there.
The Meuse-Argonne campaign would lead to the end of the First World War, not solely by itself, but in conjunction with the Allies. This is one of America's most significant and largest, most costly battles. It was fought over 47 days. Over 26,000 lost. The wounded in the hundreds of thousands. The American effort overall, we did not come in and win this war. We contributed to its end. I like to tell the French, because of the French's perspective of the First World War, I like to tell the French that all we did was we tilted the balance. And that's what we truly did. Without the Americans, what would have happened? Let the historians speculate, but it would have been a hard road. There's no tways about that. The significance overall of the Meuse-Argonne campaign was this is the first time that America would really show its power and its might. This was an essential battle to the conclusion of the war, and it was started by the Americans in support of the entire Allied offensive that was going basically from the Verdun area all the way up into Belgium. Dear brother, I cannot help but see that the end is getting near in a little while. I am still trying to dodge the shells, and if I keep on having good luck, I guess we'll see each other before a great while. Your loving brother, Paul. They've been fighting the Meuse-Argonne campaign since the end of September, and it was pretty much a long, slow, bloody grind. On the 27th, the M Company, where Paul was assigned, really got into probably some of the most bloody combat they would ever see to that time, and probably ever since. I say that because of the decimation that happened to M Company, which is a company that ordinarily would have around 200 men. And I don't know what the strength was prior to going in there, but they would come out of that battle with 34 men. That's a significant amount of loss.
As far as I can ascertain, what he was doing then was really a lot of heavy fighting, almost nonstop. The shellings that they endured being in the trenches, you didn't have anything like that in any other war.
Code 360 is where M Company took their losses. It's an absolutely incredible area to visit. I've not seen too many areas like that. They came into this area that was well fortified, expecting to be able to take the hill and hold it and move forward, as was the desire of the division, but approximately 10,000 rounds of enemy ammunition, artillery, fell on that hillside where they were in the matter of 2 hours. That's an incredible amount of ammunition in one area. Those hills would have been decimated, no trees, you see trees growing today, but the trees would have been pretty much taken down. It would have been a shattered hilltop. We can see the craters from the artillery are still quite profuse, filled with water nowadays.
Paul referenced in his letters, you didn't hear the bombs dropping until they were almost on you. It was literally just suddenly you heard a whistling sound, a little motor, and boom. You know how terrifying that must have been for them. I mean, most of these soldiers had never even seen a car. And suddenly they're dodging bombs being thrown at them from the air.
Paul's unit would move down to Saint-Maugenu, realizing that it had been pretty much decimated. The division would try to recover what they had, and they moved into basically what they considered a quiet area, although it was only 3 kilometers from where they had had lost an incredible amount of life.
I had read once at the National Archives in one of the official documents that Paul had been moved back away from the front line. And that made me happy. I thought, okay, good, he had a break from it. But then additional documents showed what that meant. He had been moved from the first trench just back to the third trench. So he was still experiencing the shelling and the bombs from the planes.
Dear brother, I've thought a good many times recently that I never would be able to write home again. We've had a hard time at this front, and we'll be glad when it's over with. Don't forget your old chum. Love from, Paul.
From the 8th of November, we have the division pushing forward and then establishing a line on the 9th of November. At this point, we're breaking out of the woods to an overlook of the plain to the east towards Metz. The armistice was being talked about, but yet men had to go into battle. The 26th did. They would find themselves next to the Ville de Chaumont, or Ville devant Chaumont, which means the village in front of Chaumont, and on the open exposed terrain there. The application of machine guns and direct observation was clear. artillery was very precise, very dangerous, as well as the machine guns, absolutely devastating. The Germans had 4 years to prepare, 4 long years to prepare. So just because it was the end of the war, and they'd hoped for the end of the war, didn't mean that they stopped fighting. They continued to fight. By the 11th, it would be going down across the valley to the east of Ville-de-Chaumont, and it is there that the armistice was declared, but as they were moving into action on that day.
The war to end all wars ended. And the soldiers were coming home. Company M was coming home. Paul's father and brother and sister went to the train to meet it. And stood there and watched as all the soldiers came off and were greeted with loving arms and celebrations that they were home. And the train emptied, and Paul was not among them. They had no idea where Paul was. Paul, at that point, had just recently been promoted to sergeant and led his squad out of the trenches into no man's land, and apparently came under heavy fire and took shelter in a bomb crater. And Paul made the decision to have his men return to the trenches while he stayed to give cover to them. And I don't know who it was, but one of his soldiers decided to stay with him. And all the others made it back to the trenches safely. But when the firing ended and they were able to go out into no man's land, they found Paul and the soldier dead together in that crater.
What those men experienced, to think that you're looking over a beautiful flat field or a small valley, but to think on the other side, 500 yards or 700 yards on the other side might have been a machine gun, or a series of machine guns, that when you move down into that valley, you can lose your life. For me, it puts it into perspective what these young men went through. Who are they as Americans, or who are they as to what field of battle did they die in? And it's the human aspect that certainly brings the importance of the battle to light, but it also brings another aspect, and that's the individual perspective, the individual families, like Lisa Ann's family. How did the loss of her uncle, Paul, how did that affect the family, and what is she attempting to discover when she looks for his heritage, his family roots?
When Look magazine came out in 1964, it was the 50th anniversary of the start of World War I. I was 3 years old, and my grandmother showed it to me, and inside was a picture of Paul's gravestone saying that for some, the last day of the war was the last day of life. And I was only 3, but I clearly remember my grandmother emotional and saying, you know, this was my cousin Paul. He was like a brother to me. And he went to war and we never saw him again, and he's buried in France. I feel such a bond with Paul. I mean, 3 years old, I was wondering about him after looking at the Look magazine. I appreciate so much what he did for this country and what he went through. And to me, it's an honor to be trying to find out everything I can about him. On November 11th, 2011, there had been an article in a Connecticut newspaper talking about a Rick Maynard who had found 50 letters from his great uncle Paul from World War I. And I actually sat there for a few seconds saying, it's a coincidence. This can't be the same Paul Maynard. This can't be any relation. And then reading the article and seeing a picture of one of the letters and instantly recognizing Paul's handwriting. We've only seen each other once, and that was just 2 days after we found each other. But it was obvious that there's a bond between us, and that bond is Paul. I was able to find out so much more about Paul during the war from those letters, just from the summaries I have from Rick. Paul liked the simple things in life. He grew up in an area where there was mostly sawmills, but everybody in the community also had their own gardening and farming. Nothing large, but it was their way of life. That's how they provided for themselves. And Paul wanted to do that for himself when he returned from the war. The fact that Paul is in the type of land where he envisioned himself spending his life. You really couldn't ask for more than that. It'd be wonderful to have Paul at Arlington. I could see him every week. I could spend so much time with him, but he wasn't a city boy. He was a country boy. He wanted to be a farmer. And, you know, he's where the fields and the crops are now. And it's a good feeling that he's there.
Every individual headstone, it's an individual story. It's someone like Paul Maynard. It's someone that's connected to Lisa Ann. And we have 14,000 of those stories out there. Those headstones can't talk. So we need to say something for them. I feel a responsibility to tell their stories, those guys out there. Not only their stories, but their family stories. Not only those family stories, but the American story. That's how we transmit their history. That's how we transmit us as Americans, because their story is our story. We need to know that.
I don't think I'm ever going to stop digging into Paul Maynard and everything about him. I think there's always something more to learn as you go along. Something leads to something else, and the story never gets old. Paul only lived 21 years, but he did a lot in that 21 years, and I think it's worth telling his story. It should never be forgotten.